Morning guys, you're joining me here today at the fabulous Tunnel Barn Farm. I've sat on Canal Lake Peg 6. Now we've just come into October, which means the Teams of 4 Winter League is really quickly approaching. We're probably only 2 or 3 weeks away from the first match. Now what I'm going to be doing today, I'm going to be showing you a couple of methods that have worked brilliant for me in the past, in the first few rounds of the Winter League, when the water temperature is still probably 10 or 12 degrees. So I'm going to be fishing short and I'm going to be fishing in the margins. I'm going to talk you through what bait to use, how to attack them, and just what I do on each line, which hopefully will catch you more fish in the early rounds of the Winter League. Right guys, for me, this time of year and in the early rounds of the Winter League, the very best way of starting my match is to fish short with soft pellets, i.e. feeding micros with a 4mm expander on the hook. The best thing about this is that you get an immediate reaction. When you tap in pellets, for some reason you just get fish into your peg really quickly. I think it's the noise of the pellets going in and the smell of the pellets in the water. So you get a real quick reaction, which is what you want at the very beginning of the match. Also, what this does, this gives you a really good picture about how many fish and what fish are in your peg. So today you could start off by catching lots of stockies, and that gives you a real indication that you're probably going to catch quite a lot of stockies today, and it gives you an idea of what weight you're going to be fishing for. You could go in and catch great big F1s, which is what you want on a lot of the pegs, and it gives you another indication of what weight you're fishing for and just what fish you're fishing for. So what I've done, I've plumbed up just past the bottom of the shelf, which is a nice distance. So I'm using a short top kit, a short 4 section, a number 5 section, halfway up my number 6 section, which is perfect for me at this distance, because what I'm going to be doing, once I've caught my initial run on pellets, I'm going to swap this line to maggots, throw in maggots for a real good late run. So this line itself is brilliant at the start and late on in the match. So what I'm doing, I'm fishing with a kinder pot on the end of my pole, but I've got a sprinkle lid on. I'm actually filling the kinder pot up with 2mm pellets all soaked up, and I'm fishing with a 4mm expander on the hook. So I'm going to be shipping out to the length. I've used a bit of tape on my number 6 section to remind me exactly where I'm fishing. I'm going to be dropping my rig in, and I'm just going to be sprinkling in a few 2mm pellets. You don't want to be dumping in a whole kinder pot full because it's just way too much bait. So I'm going to be sprinkling in probably 30 or 40 2mm pellets, and we're just going to fish and see if we can get a bite. Now the great thing about it is this pot holds a lot more than 30 or 40 micros. So if you sprinkle a few in and you don't get a bite, what you can do after a couple of minutes, you can just repeat the process. You can just turn the pot over, tap a few more 2mm in, and just carry on fishing. One really important thing about how you drop your rig in when you're fishing with pellets is really important as well, because you can get bitted out at times fishing with soft pellets. So the best way of doing it is to drop the bulk just past your pole tip, lower your float in so your float's about 6 to 10 inches out of the water, tap some 2mm pellets in, your 30 or 40 again, and then drop your rig in. Now for some reason, when you drop your rig in like this, you get a lot of quick bites. So it might settle just like that, see? Just as it was settling there, I had a bite straight away. Now those 2mm pellets hadn't hit the bottom yet, but I think the fish are drawn to that area, and sometimes if your hook pellet is on the bottom before your feed pellets, you can get a quick bite. But now everything's down, now everything's nice and settled, we're just going to sit and wait for a bite. But like I said, this way of fishing is a great way of starting your match because you get such an initial reaction. For some reason, the smell, the noise, everything about fishing with soft pellets, it just brings every fish into your peg. It's just another little indication there. But that's fine. You've started your match, you're fishing on the silt, so you're going to be getting quite a few indications, especially if you've got those stockies in your peg. Last year, there was a load of stockies stocked in Tunnel Barn, from 4 ounces up to a pound. Now certain pegs is absolutely full of them. So if you are on one of those pegs, you've got to expect to get lots of indications, lots of misbites, but you just got to go through that and just get into a rhythm and see if you can catch them. If you are on a peg where it's full with the old fish, which are a lot bigger, you might have to be more patient and just sit and wait for bites. But we've had two, oh, the hook bait's just come off there, just popped off. But even if you have to ship in to replace your bait, just keep those pellets in the pot and repeat the process. Now what I'll be looking to do on this line is be looking to get some bites really quickly. Now if I can keep this line going for 30 minutes, 40 minutes or even an hour, that gives you a real great start to the match. Then once that run's finished, I can then change to throwing maggots on this line. And then once I come into the margin or go across, or the whole time I can just keep throwing maggots, which I'll talk to you about a little bit more detail in a minute. So I fed once, we had 2 indications, but no hooked fish. So I'm just going to feed again and just repeat the process and see if I can hook another one. Oh, there we go. Real fast fight. And I think from the amount of bubbles we were getting and the amount of indications, that's probably going to be a stocky. But a decent stocky, probably 8 or 10 ounces. Now I've caught one and I've got the rig in, I'll just talk you through the rig. Now for me, at Tunnel Barn, there's really no need of fishing hairy fairy rigs. What you have got, you've got quite a few small fish. Now in my experience, when you're fishing with pellets or maggots last year in the Winter League, if you fished light strung out rigs, all you did was catch those fish, those unwanted fish. The best way of fishing last year was just to fish a bulked up heavy rig, get your bait to the bottom a little bit over depth and just fish for those bigger fish. If you can catch those bigger stockies or those big old F1s, it really does make a difference at the end when you're weighing in. So the rig itself, I've got a size 16 MVR F1 fine hook on, a 5-inch hook length to 0.11. We've got one number 9 dropper right at the top of the hook length, leading up to a bulk of another 5 number 9s with my trimmers on. The main line itself is 0.16, so it's really strong and durable. The float itself is just a slim hollow bristle 0.4 float with a 2 number 8 back shot just above it, just to try and keep the float as still as possible. The elastic itself is what I use for all my F1 fishing this time of year, is the 8 to 11 jaw core through a short stop, and that's just a perfect balanced rig for this type of fishing. It's about 4 to 4.5 foot deep here, so a 0.4 float with that shotting pattern more bulked up, it really is perfect. Now it's really positive, so when I do start fishing maggots, I can just use the same rig as well. I can use the same hook, same floats, everything, same elastic, and which makes it really simple with rig choice. So I'm just going to go in again and see if I can get another, see if I can have a good run short, and then hopefully swap to maggots and catch some bigger fish, or just keep catching these stockies and have a really great start to the day. Right, so we've had a great start on pellets, just tapping in my 2 mils, 4 mil expand on the hook. That's been brilliant. I've caught loads of stockies. Then I've come away from that line and I've started loose feeding maggots on that exact same line, where I'm going to be using the same rig on the bottom and maybe catch a few shallow. But my next move would be to come into the edge at this point. Now, a lot of people think margin fishing is for late on in the match and bigger fish move in. But when you're fishing on snake lakes like this, you've got to try and think as the margin as in the cross line, but just a little bit closer to yourself. So you can go in at any point down the margin on a snake lake and catch really well. So what I've done, I've plumbed up. Now this peg here, I can actually fish anything from about 12 inches to 4 foot. So one great little tip for you at this time of year when the water's just starting to go a little bit clearer, 30 inches, 2.5 foot is a brilliant depth to actually fish in. So I've actually set my float at 30 inches before I've even put my rig in, and I've actually found 30 inches, and I've been really lucky today because 30 inches is just on a slightly flat spot, so we're going to fish there. Now about 15 minutes before I come off of my pellet line, I could see that it was just starting to die, so I've fed my my margin swim initially with 125 mil of crushed expander. Now that 15 minutes just allows some fish to move to that area, just settle down before you start fishing. So How I'm going to actually start fishing when I first go in on it is I'm going to be fishing with double dead red maggot on the hook, and I'm going to be fishing again with a small kinder pot on, but I'm just going to be filling that kinder pot up with ground bait. And that's how I'm going to fish initially. But one great other way of feeding that line, once you've put your initial 125mm in, especially when it goes slightly a little bit colder, is just to have a slightly different pot on with a sprinkle lid on, like I was using on pellets. Go in and just sprinkle live maggots in and fish with double live maggot over that top of that initial 125mm ground bait. So there's two ways of feeding it once you go on this line. But just to start off with, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to fish with a small kinder pot on, and I'm just going to feed some ground bait. Now what I am doing, which is another great tip, is I'm fishing exactly the same length down the edge as what I am short. I'm using the same marker on my pole. Now what this allows me to do is to ship out, get to my marker, feed my maggots on my short line at that distance, once, twice, and then just literally swivel round, and you're all at the same mark, and you can just drop your rig in. It's nice and quick and efficient. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to flick my rig out. I'm going to dunk my pot underneath the water, let the water rush in the holes in the pot, lift that pot out, and all the ground bait should be out. And I'm just going to drag my float just up the shelf of where that ground bait went in, and we're going to be looking for some bites pretty quickly. Like I said before, 2.5 foot is a great line, a great depth to fish in this time of year. Just when the water starts to get a little bit clearer and the fish start to see the pole tip over the water, see your hook length, for that depth, for some reason, really does work well. It works across to the island and it works in the margins. Sometimes, if you are really lucky, you can use the same rig for both, across and in the margins. So we've just potted that ground bait in, dragged that rig up just a touch, and there we go. Oh, there's a bite pretty quickly, but it's just a leaf. But what I'm going to be looking to do is every single time I ship out to go into the margins or do anything else, you've got to remember to feed your maggots. So I'm going to go in again, feed my maggots once, twice, and I'm going to swivel right round, and I'm going to go in again. I haven't fed because I still feel like that ground bait is going to be in the margin, in that spot, so I'm going to be waiting for a bite now. There we go, bite straight away. Flick your rig in, always flick your rig in down shelf. You don't ever want to be flicking it up shelf, so you're fishing in shallow water where you've plumbed up. So just keep flicking your rig out like that, keep dragging it in the shelf. And when the fish come in and start feeding confidently, you should get really confident bites on this line. Just had another little line bite there. And hopefully, when you do start catching on this line, the fish should be bigger. The stockies you catch should be 10 to 12 ounces, and hopefully what we'll do, we'll hook an odd old F1, like the 2, 3, 4 pounders. There we go, a bite fairly quickly, slightly better stocky. There we go, that's a bigger new one, but that's the sort of fish you're going to be looking to catch in the edge. So what happened then, I've potted my ground bait in, I've had some initial reaction and we've caught one. So what I would do normally in a match is I'll just carry on with that process. But what I'm going to do, just to see, as we're not in a match, is we can take that kinder pot off, straight away put a sprinkle lid pot on, and we'll just have a go quickly now at just sprinkling in the maggots and fishing with live maggots on the hook, just to see if we get a quicker response. So 2 live maggots on, both hooked through the thin end of the maggot, the tail of the maggot. You get a lot less wrap rounds, a lot less hook pulls on that. And we're just going to fill this sprinkle lid pot up exactly the same as what we're doing with the pellets earlier, with probably 50 maggots. And what we're going to do, we're just going to sprinkle them in over the top of that ground bait. Now this way of feeding for me last year in the first 3 rounds, initially 125mm ground bait and then tapping in maggots over the top, worked absolutely brilliant for me. I drew on House Lake on one of the rounds and I caught a load of fish fishing like this. So there was initial response straight away. Keep flicking your rig in down shelf. But exactly the same as before, like we were doing with the pellets. There you go. So that was a bit of a quicker response. So this way of feeding might be better today. But the fish definitely are a slightly better stamp on this line. See, look, the stocky again, but it's a big stocky, which is what you need to catch a weight to win at this time of year. So straight away we fed with ground bait once. We had a good response, but not quite as good as tapping in maggots, which is what I found last year really was the way to feed. But whilst I got the rig out of the water, I'll talk you through. It's virtually exactly the same to pellets. So we've got a size 16 hook on, a 5-inch hook length of 0.11, 0.16 main line, your first shot at the top of the hook length, then a bulk. But the only difference between the 2 rigs is because we're fishing in shallower water, we're fishing in 2.5 foot instead of 4.5 foot. I've just gone for a 0.2 float instead of the point floor. 2 number 8 back shot, I've actually spread them out for the edge because we're fishing on a shelf. I want everything just to sit a bit nicer. 8 to 11 jaw core hollow, everything I use. I got my sprinkle lid through a short stop. Exactly the same rig as pellets, but just fishing with maggots with a slightly smaller float in the margins. But I got all my rigs virtually set up exactly the same. The only difference I would ever use is different floats for different depths. The shotting pattern, the hooks, the line, everything is more or less exactly the same every time I fish here, which makes it nice and simple. When you're actually fishing, you don't want to be thinking to yourself, am I using the right float, hooks, line, everything. If you just keep everything the same and you're confident in how you're doing it, all you need to be thinking about then is how you're feeding. So what I'm going to do again, go out to your marker, feed twice, swivel right back in, and we're fishing again. We'll do the same again. We'll just tap in like 30 maggots, no, probably 20 maggots this time. Flick a rig in and we're ready for another bite. Oh, the bite straight away. Another indications. We're definitely getting more indications once I've started tapping in live maggots. There's a few bubbles there as well, which is a really good sign. There might be some slightly better fish just moving to the peg. There we go. See, straight away, much better reaction. But that's the 2 way of feeding it. If it was a little bit warmer, probably the ground bait would be good. But now it's gone a little bit colder. There's definitely the water's clearer and there's definitely a nip in the air. Tapping in maggots over the top of an initial amount of ground bait really does work well. One thing you've got to bear in mind at this time of year, when the water temperature is still quite high, 12 degrees plus, that line where you're feeding your maggots, you must have a shallow rig set up, because if you draw a really good peg and there's lots of fish in that area, sometimes they can come up. Whilst I was fishing in the margins the whole time, I've been feeding my short line, and I thought, when I first initially go out, I thought I'll go out shallow just to see if I can catch some bigger fish, and I've dropped in, I've hooked one straight away, which is a great sign. When I hooked it, I saw another one swirl and a little bow wave went off. So you know there's a lot of fish in your peg. And the great thing about fishing shallow is that most of the fish you hook are going to be those old big ones. So I'm going to keep feeding really regular, fish at about 2 to 2.5 foot deep, and hopefully catch like this for as long as possible. Well, there you go, another one shallow. I feel like there's quite a lot of fish in the peg, to be fair. One great little tip though with your rig is this time of year there's not going to be a certain depth that's right all the time when you're fishing shallow. So the last thing that you want to do is shorten the line between your float and your pole tip too short. This time of year you're not going to miss loads of bites shallow, and it's not the sort of fishing where you have to be really quickly. When you get a bite, a lot of the time if you're fishing with 12 or 18 inches of line you still hook it. But when you do fish with 12 to 18 inches of line, it allows you to adjust your depth all the time. So you might want to catch one or two fish, then you feel like the fish have gone shallow, you might want to bring it down or push it back up. So you don't want to shorten your line down too much with your shallow rigs this time of year. 12 to 18 inches of line between your pole tip and your float is absolutely perfect. But I feel like there's a lot of fish in my peg there. I've gone in, I've caught 3 or 4 shallow really quickly. So I'm just going to keep feeding now and just keep catching. Well, there you go, it's been absolutely solid shallow, to be honest. The fish really have come up into the bait and started competing, and it seems like every fish I've caught shallow as well has been like a real big stocky, and I've caught some of the old ones as well, like the 3-4 pounders. So you can see how you've been catching lots of big weights here recently, the size of that one. Some of the match weights here recently have been excess of 150 pound, and you can see just why, the size of that. But what I am going to do, obviously know that shallow's brilliant. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to drop on the bottom as well, just to see if it's better or worse, or what size fish are on the bottom, because probably 70% of your matches that you fish when you come here on the bottom is going to be better than shallow. Your first couple you might have a chance of catching shallow, but I am going to drop on the bottom just to see what's occurring down there. Like I said before, I'm going to use exactly the same rig that I used on pellets, so all really nice and positive, same hook, same float, everything. But I'm going to feed it slightly different. When I was fishing shallow, I was feeding probably 15 maggots all the time, just to try and bring the fish up. When I drop down on the bottom, I'm going to flick my rig out exactly the same as pellets, and I'm going to feed 2 real decent handfuls and try and make the fish drop down to the bottom so you catch one. So I'm going to feed once, twice, and see if I can catch a few on the bottom as well. So we've dropped down on the bottom. We've had quite a few indications on the float, which I think is probably still fish up in the water, but we have caught a fish. And straight away, like I said, it's a smaller stamp, which is what I was expecting, to be honest. In general, not just here at Tunnel Barn, every fishery around the country, if you can catch shallow, the fish do tend to be a lot bigger sized. So we'll have one more go down on the bottom, and then we've caught on every method that I've explained. So again, I'm going to go out, I'm just going to hook double maggot through the fin end, drop my bulk in nice and positive, so all my rig's going down as quick as possible, and we're going to feed twice. We're going to feed 2 decent handfuls right around the float. So 1, 2. There we go, another one. See, there's a lot of fish in my peg, but, oh, another skimmer. But you can see, I've gone from catching 2-3 pound F1 shallow to fishing on the bottom to catching skimmers and stockies, which is a perfect example of why you've got to have everything set up. You've got to have your bottom rig set up, you've got to have your shallow, your margin rig set up. That's an actual perfect example of why. Because one day you'll catch shallow and catch all those big uns, the next day you might drop on the bottom and catch the big uns on the bottom. So there you go, guys. We've had an absolutely fantastic day fishing short and in the margins. I've kept it really simple. A lot of great anglers you'll see that will only have 2, 3, 4 rigs set up for this type of fishing, and it's exactly what I've done today. I've got my shallow rig, I've got my margin rig, and I've got my on the bottom short rig, and that's really all you need to catch a real big weight this time of year. You're going to be needing in an excess of 100 to 150 pounds to win matches now, and maybe even the first 2 or 3 rounds of the Winter League. You're going to need a big weight. So I'm definitely going to be fishing like this. Hopefully you will do the same. But join me later on in the year when the weather turns a little bit and it does go colder, and I'll go into a bit more detail on how to attack a very similar venue like Tunnel Barn when the water's clearer and it's gone colder, and maybe maggots and pinkies could be the way to approach it. But yeah, I hope you've learned a bit. I hope to see you out on the bank soon.